The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, and welcome to Ohio EPA's virtual public outreach session regarding the Maumee Farfield Load Analysis Plan. My name is Heather Lauer, and I'm hosting today's meeting. With me online from Ohio EPA are Tiffany Kavalek, Melinda Harris, and Paul Gledhill with the Division of Surface Water. Jessica Langdon is working tech. I'd like to note we are recording this meeting. Before we get started, let's go over a few things to help you navigate the GoTo platform. On this slide, you will see an example screenshot of your attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your computer desktop on the right side of your screen. For this public meeting, you're listening in using your computer audio. If you are having sound issues or if the slides stop advancing, try refreshing your browser. If that doesn't work, try logging off and logging back in. Please submit public comments by clicking on the question mark icon and typing them into the questions pane on your attendee interface. You may send your questions in at any time during the hearing, and we will answer questions toward the end. All comments submitted will be read aloud for the whole audience to hear. If you choose to submit questions outside of this meeting, all comments are due no later than October 22nd, 2021. They should be submitted to epatmdl@epa.ohio.gov. When you do this, please include any maps, photos, and documents that are referred to in your attachments, or for reference as attachments. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Melinda Harris.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for an overview of the Maumee Watershed TMDL Project Loading Analysis Plan. In general, Ohio follows 5 major steps in the development of a TMDL project. Today, we are discussing Step 3, the Loading Analysis Plan of the Maumee Watershed Nutrient TMDL Project. Information considered for Steps 1 and 2 of this project was detailed in Ohio EPA's Module 2 outreach presentation and is available on Ohio EPA's Maumee Watershed Nutrient TMDL project webpage. A slide near the end of this presentation contains the link to the project webpage where you can find the 3 outreach modules and additional background on this project. The purpose of the LAP, or Loading Analysis Plan, for a TMDL project is to explain the where, what, and how details before Ohio EPA begins the modeling work. It is after the details are set that the modeling work is performed and the TMDL calculations are determined. The results of the modeling work are presented in the preliminary modeling results, Step 4 of the new TMDL development process. For the Maumee Watershed Nutrient TMDL project, we will review the details of what assessment units are included, what targets will be used to address the impaired units, and what modeling methods will be used for the loading calculations. For the Maumee Watershed Nutrient TMDL project, the beneficial uses to be addressed by this TMDL are recreation and public drinking water, which are impaired due to harmful algal blooms. The TMDL will also be protective of aquatic life use impairments due to nutrients. Ohio EPA is currently working on a new aquatic life use assessment methodology for Lake Erie shoreline and open water units. This new assessment methodology will be previewed in the upcoming 2022 integrated report. I'm now going to hand over presenting to Paul Gledhill.
Good afternoon, Paul Gledhill. Thanks for joining us. Getting the Western Lake Erie's harmful algal blooms in check is what this TMDL is all about. The blooms are fed by excessive nutrients being delivered to the lake, primarily from the Maumee River watershed. Now, there are 3 Lake Erie assessment units that have impaired uses that this TMDL directly applies to. And those uses, the recreation and drinking water uses, are what Melinda just explained. Now, these assessment units are shown on this map. The dark green is the Western Basin shoreline. The light green is the Western Basin open water. And the purple areas are the shoreline around the islands. This TMDL will allocate or provide guidance for limitation for nutrients from Ohio's portion of the Maumee River watershed. That's the gray area within Ohio. So the TMDL will provide a plan for nutrient reductions from the Maumee's watershed to address impairments in the lake being driven by those nutrients. Now this slide, we're looking at the same map showing the assessment units the TMDL will address and the Maumee River watershed. Note the red dot right there on the map. That is the Waterville sampling location. It's a spot on the Maumee River where continuous water quality has been monitored at this location for over 30 years by the National Center for Water Quality Research at Heidelberg University. Nutrient reduction targets to address Western Lake Erie's harmful algal blooms have been developed by a binational group of water quality experts. These targets, called the Annex 4 targets, outline needed phosphorus reductions from the Maumee River in order to minimize the Lake Erie's harmful algal blooms to acceptable sizes. The Annex 4 targets are specifically developed for this Waterville sampling location, this red dot. Now, if you look at the map now, you can see this red hashed area. That shows the part of the Maumee watershed draining to the Waterville sampling location. As you can see, it's the majority of the watershed. However, even though there's not much area downstream of Waterville, we propose that the entire Maumee watershed be included in this TMDL. This allows for much more of the greater Toledo area to be included. So on the next slide, you're going to see the reduction targets for the Waterville location and the one calculated for the entire TMDL, which includes this gray area here downstream of Waterville. This table shows the two targets proposed in the loading analysis plan. Both targets apply to the spring season, which is the beginning of March through the end of July each year. Phosphorus exported outside of March through July, that time period, has not been shown to contribute to the lake's annual harmful algal bloom. Now the first value, 860 metric tons of total phosphorus, that is the Annex 4 total phosphorus target for the Waterville monitoring location. This is taken directly from the Annex 4 reductions recommendations mentioned on the previous slide. Now, using nutrient mass balance methods, Ohio EPA has calculated a target for the entire Maumee watershed. That's including much more of the Toledo metro area. We propose this to be the final TMDL target, and this value, the 914.4 metric tons of phosphorus, it's just over 2 million pounds. So note that right now we're talking about total phosphorus only. We're going to discuss dissolved reactive phosphorus in a few slides. Every 2 years, Ohio EPA publishes a nutrient mass balance study for the state's major rivers. The objective of this study is to determine nutrient, both total phosphorus and total nitrogen, loads and relative proportions of point and non-point sources. In general, this method allows us to look at observed nutrients being exported from our rivers and to divide out those nutrients to various sources. Now, these sources could, for example, include urban sources, agriculture activities, or sewage treatment. We're proposing to use a refined version of our mass balance modeling approach for the allocations or assignments of total phosphorus in this TMDL project. This allows for the accounting to be a more straightforward, more understandable. The refinement of this method includes breaking out the non-point source loads into various components and also applying a hydrologic weighting factor that'll help us break out the sub-watersheds. All of this means calculations will be balanced on actual observed data based on measurements happening in the Maumee River. And speaking of water quality observations, every dot on this map represents a tributary where stream flow and nutrients are continuously being observed by Heidelberg and/or USGS. This means that a tremendous number of samples, 100 or more every year, are being collected at each of these dots. The state plans to track these nutrient reductions so we can the state plans to track progress of nutrient reductions via all of these monitoring stations. This will allow us to use actual observed, not estimated or modeling data to track progress. We will also use results from the existing Soil and Water Assessment Tool, or SWOT for short, modeling to verify TMDL calculations and help suggest overall implementation actions. Now, a good deal of SWOT modeling has been published for the Maumee River by our university partners. This work includes investigating scenarios of what types and how many nutrient reduction practices would be needed to meet the phosphorus reduction goals aimed at putting the Western Lake Erie HABs in check. So as explained a few slides ago, we plan to use a mass balance method for the total phosphorus allocations in this TMDL project. We also plan to use SWOT models, existing SWOT models, for verification that allocations are reasonable and to simulate scenarios of implementation that will meet our goals. So I want to briefly provide some pros and cons of the various modeling efforts that were considered. Now, the mass balance method is straightforward. It's an empirical approach that accounts for total phosphorus in a conservative manner. And by that, I mean we consider all of the nutrient that is observed in the stream in a given spring season as all of the nutrient that was delivered to the streams throughout the watershed. This is a simplifying assumption that considers the losses and gains of total phosphorus that occur through natural processes to generally cancel themselves out. It is certainly a more easily understandable and reproducible compared to more complicated modeling methods. However, the mass balance method is static in the sense that it cannot be changed to simulate complicated future changes in management. Now, deterministic watershed models, such as SWOT, LSPC, WASP, and there's others, they simulate many natural processes of nutrient movement from the watershed through the stream networks and all the way to the end of the river, in this case to Lake Erie. Changes in land management, such as changes in fertilization practices, they can be layered in these models to run scenarios for future settings. So the downside of these models is that they are very complicated and therefore require a great deal of resources to be invested. Many different versions and iterations of these models can be developed, and this can bring about disagreements over which one should be used as the official TMDL allocation model. We think the modeling approach that we have proposed in this lab strikes the right balance for this project. Using the mass balance methods for the official allocation improves clarity and understanding. By employing existing SWOT models, we can confirm that the allocations are within reason, and it allows us to better plan for implementation actions. Overall, because this is such an observed data-rich watershed, we think this project can be a great success using the empirical modeling approach. Now, the Annex 4 reduction target for total phosphorus is proposed for this TMDL. The Annex 4 recommendations document also includes a dissolved reactive phosphorus load target to address this problem. Explained in this TMDL's lab, only total phosphorus will be used to develop allocations in this initial TMDL. Dissolved reactive phosphorus is a subset of total phosphorus. It is the part that's most available for algae to use because it's not bound to soils or other solids. The non-conservative nature of dissolved reactive phosphorus, however, means that its loads are very difficult, if not impossible, to track using the mass balance modeling method proposed. This fact, combined with the limited ability of other models to effectively represent key pathways for dissolved reactive phosphorus, forces Ohio to continue to follow an adaptive implementation approach, and that's set out in our domestic action plan. Now, this will be reevaluated when current research on best management practices has yielded more detailed results on dissolved reactive phosphorus movement and tracking. Additionally, efforts to reduce total phosphorus generally reduce dissolved reactive phosphorus. And I'll note that we are aware that there are some instances where the opposite is true, but Ohio is coordinating with researchers to identify and fine-tune best management practices in order to maximize dissolved reactive phosphorus reductions. Now, TMDLs are living documents. Therefore, this project can and will be reopened to address dissolved reactive phosphorus once the research and science has evolved. Posted on the Maumee Watershed Nutrient TMDL's webpage, and mentioned by Melinda earlier, are links to YouTube videos that provided early outreach for this project. There are 3 of them. Now, the third module of these videos overviews our ongoing nutrient reduction efforts. It discusses the iterative nature of planning, implementation, nutrient reduction tracking, and then evaluating all of this with research that's going on by university and federal agencies. Each step of this is part of the adaptive process that's shown on this diagram on the slide. So we'd encourage you to check out that video to see everything happening on the ground right now. Now, in response to those 3 outreach videos, we have already received stakeholder requests for certain policy actions to address pollutants delivered from livestock farms, point sources such as wastewater treatment plants, and other sources. And we certainly appreciate stakeholders' concerns and interests in these issues. And the TMDL will provide recommendations for pollution reductions. However, these specific source reductions do not really get included until the 4th step of Ohio's TMDL process, and that's the preliminary modeling results report. Now, we are on target to release that report around March of 2022. So comments received so far, they will be fully considered, but that'll happen when we reach that point of the process, and we're just not quite there yet. So now I am going to pass the reins back to Melinda.
Ohio EPA has committed to develop the Maumee Watershed Nutrient TMDL within 2 to 3 years from the time we publish the 2020 integrated report. The expected release dates for the 2 final steps of this TMDL process are shown on this slide. There will be a public comment period for each of the next 2 steps. The preliminary modeling results will have a 30-day comment period, and the draft TMDL will have a 60-day comment period. The last step in this process will be to submit the final TMDL to US EPA for review and approval. We are specifically requesting input right now on: have we listed all of the appropriate assessment units to be addressed? Are the water quality restoration targets appropriately identified? And do you have concerns or questions about how mass balance and slop modeling methods will establish and track the TMDL loading calculations? Again, these are the topics that are outlined in the draft loading analysis plan that are out for public comment right now. Comments on our loading analysis plan document are due by October 22nd. And they can be submitted to the email address shown on this slide. Note that this date represents a 14-day extension that we've already approved from the original October 8th deadline. The draft loading analysis plan, as well as background information on this project, can be found on our Maumee Watershed Nutrient TMDL webpage. This webpage will be updated throughout the development and implementation of this TMDL project. Now Heather will explain the question and answer portion of today's meeting. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. In order to conserve bandwidth, I'm going to ask that you please submit your questions by clicking on the question and typing your question in, and I will read the question aloud to our staff member who will then respond. And so we do have a question to Paul Gledhill. This is from John Patel, and please forgive me if I do not get the pronunciation of your name right, but I believe it's Patowski. And the question is, are the observed data from the Heidelberg stations going to be used to assign loads to source sectors, or are the data only being used to track progress?
Hello. The answer is both. The mass balance method, it is based on observed data. That's the fundamental point of it. We understand, we have our monitoring data, and that's primarily going to be the Heidelberg station at Waterville. And then we add up everything that is contributing to it, the sources. And so if you're familiar with our nutrient mass balance reports, it's a very similar process to that. We will add some value to it. But then we will also be using the stations that Heidelberg and many of these stations USGS monitors exclusively to track progress. So, and we're doing that now through H2 Ohio. We're looking at these each season, and we're seeing, are we seeing changes? And it's a tricky thing because we've got to understand hydrology really makes or breaks how much we have, how much non-point source comes in a given year. When it rains a lot, you get a great deal more nutrients, regardless of if there's been a change or not. So, you know, we will use all of the data we have to track progress. We will use the Waterville station specifically to do the mass balance. And then we also mentioned using SWAT modeling to confirm that we're within reason to verify our mass balance methods. And that SWAT modeling is going through an iteration right now out of OSU where they're using more stations within the Maumee on that map I showed with lots of monitoring points. They're actually going to be kind of doing like sub-calibrations within the watershed. So we're really excited about that. It just gives more certainty to that modeling work.
Okay, thank you. The next question we have is from Adrian Nimura. When will Ohio EPA have a comparison of the nutrient mass balance model and the SWAT model or models? This is actually a two-parter, so if you could answer that, that would be great, and then I'll have the follow-up.
I don't believe we would have like a separate document just looking at the comparisons, but that material would be included in our fourth step of the TMDL, the preliminary modeling results. Several stakeholders on this call and certainly state agencies are on stakeholder advisory panels of the modeling, and the state has funded a lot of OSU's modeling of the SWAT modeling. So comparisons, you know, we will certainly have a very robust description of that in the next round of the report. And the other half of the question?
The other half is, will stakeholders have an opportunity to review that comparison prior to Ohio EPA releasing the preliminary model results?
Yeah, I'm not certain how much, what level of outreach we'll have prior to the report being released, but there will be an official public comment period before that document gets final. And we will probably have another one of these type of meetings after that report is released.
So this is Tiffany. I'll jump in here. And Adrian, to answer your opportunity to review the comparison, again, we're not sure we'll have a specific comparison, but we are going to be meeting with the agency directors at the end of this month to discuss on the ground stakeholder outreach prior to finalizing the preliminary modeling results that will be published in March. But my understanding is that we should be able to be on the ground discussing what's going to be in that document before we actually publish it, because it really is the meat and heart of the TMDL. So I do want face-to-face stakeholder input prior to that, and that would involve having those deep technical discussions.
Okay, the next question comes from Carrie Gerwin. It's for Paul Gledhill. Paul stated that NPS loads will be broken into various NPS components. Will you please list which NPS components will be detailed in the preliminary modeling results?
Sure. If you're familiar with what we did in Domestic Action Plan, we will have a breakdown of non-point sources of natural areas, agriculture areas, and urban areas. Now, if you're familiar with how TMDLs work, they really, in general, it's just one non-point source chunk. So that'll be kind of an added value that we'll provide. And it's not clear yet if that will be the official allocations or if it'll just be that group. We're still working on that. We're developing that. But it will look a lot like that. Is that okay?
Okay, give me just a moment, please. I'm sorry, bear with me as I'm working on a little bit of connectivity on my end. Okay, my apologies. Okay, I think it's coming back. I have a question from Todd Brennan for Paul Gledhill. Can you include a plan to include DRP development within this TMDL, meaning it would outline the steps needed to plan for an assessment of DRP starting now?
Like we said, we don't think we can develop TMDL for DRP right now. SWAT models and a lot of watershed models, the deterministic ones, as I categorize those, they do have DRP in them. The real hard problem we have is understanding the connection between best management practices, actions happening on the ground in the actual fields and even edge of fields, and how that relates to getting to the river, because there's so much spiraling, there's so much movement of dissolved phosphorus. In the loading analysis plan, we referenced some of Dr. Jim Hood's work, and he's a scientist at OSU, not a modeler, but he's finding some really interesting things about the movement of dissolved reactive phosphorus as it changes form. And when we're dealing with such a big watershed, we just don't see that we have the science there to completely do a dissolved reactive phosphorus TMDL at this time. We've consulted with other states and US EPA, and there are not hardly any dissolved reactive phosphorus TMDLs. So we want to be able to do this, and as I said, we are committing to including dissolved reactive phosphorus. We just want to get this started right now with the total.
I think we're getting, Heather, I just want to address some of the comments that are getting in that we haven't flagged to answer. And I think they're related to animal operations, and from John and from Sandy about CAFOs and manure. And again, I think the specific agricultural allocations of sources is going to happen at the preliminary modeling results stage. It's not in this current document, and we will be out doing outreach with all of the interest groups between now and March, talking about the animal contributions and how and if it will be part of the modeling, the PMR, but that's not up for discussion right now. But Paul, I think you can answer Sandy's other question about how we came up with the 51.4 tons of phosphorus being deposited below Toledo.
Yeah, certainly. If you're familiar with our mass balance equations, we have the what we call the pour point, POUR. And so that's the monitoring point. In the case of the Maumee, that's Waterville. So we have a really good solid number there, right? That's Laura Johnson at Heidelberg has calculated that number. We know what the load is. Downstream of the pour point, we don't have much monitoring. It's a lot harder to monitor when the river starts getting backed up by the lake as an estuary or leucostuary, as some people refer to it. So in our mass balance methods we've been doing since 2016 is we know what the point source loads are. And that's the wastewater treatment plants. They are measured very regularly and reported to us as part of the permits. We also use the same kind of algorithm we have for determining the unsewered human population. You know, the same thing we use to assign loads upstream of the pour point, we use to apply loads downstream of the pour points. And then there's the non-point source load, right? And so we don't have an actual measurement to balance that on. So what we do is we base that on yields of how much, in this case, total phosphorus per acre there is that we've seen. Now, in this watershed, I showed that map of all the monitoring. It's awesome. We have monitoring more dense, you know, continuous monitoring, not something that's sampled once a month or even every other week. This is continuous monitoring. So we have a really good understanding of what's happening. And I'll point out the one of those monitoring gauges is Wolf Creek on the west side of Toledo. So that's a real suburban area. And we're seeing that that yield, that pounds per acre of phosphorus is quite a bit different there than the more predominantly agriculture stations upstream. So we used all of that to kind of come up with that number.
Okay, we have a question from Peter Hess. How will the 914-ton target at the mouth of the watershed be measured?
Yeah, that's good because that's right in the same vein, and that's a great question because it won't be directly measured like what we measure at Waterville, and that's why we really wanted to include in the loading analysis plan that we still are aware of this Waterville target, and we still have to be protective of it. That's the really hard thing we know. Basically, what we'll do each year is we'll do that same calculation. We'll look at how much point sources there were. We'll look at if there's any change in the home sewage treatment. And there are some changes happening right now with more people getting into centralized sewers. And then the non-point source yield, which, you know, that's why, in particular, that Wolf Creek gauge, but really all the gauges. So it will be calculated as we move from when we complete this TMDL to actually tracking and reporting on it, that extra zone.
Okay. Is there anything else that folks here wanted to add to that?
I will just say that we've gotten numerous comments about dissolved reactive phosphorus and comments that other states have done TMDLs for DRP. And I think I want to just make it clear again that we're not writing off DRP. We do think we're going to be able to put in some practices and measures of DRP in this initial TMDL, but our researchers are telling us we don't have a good way yet to track it, and we're relying on our researchers. And a lot of work has been funded through HABRI, and those research efforts are ongoing right now. They may be ready by the time that we are ready to issue the TMDL next fall, but all indications are that this takes time. And as soon as the DRP research is at a point where our researchers are giving us the thumbs up that it can be tracked in a very systematic way, we will update this TMDL and include it. And we're not looking at DRP. Again, if you've watched our module 3, there's a lot of work that's going on the ground that's focusing both on total phosphorus and DRP. So I'm not going to answer each individual DRP question. I just wanted to make that clear. Hold on. And Paul, I think you can answer the next question from Steve Samuels. Heather, can you read that for the group?
Let me get to that one, please. How How will Ohio EPA address voice load allocations and load allocations for Indiana and Michigan? Specifically, it is common practice when a state is developing a TMDL to set the concentrations for the upstream boundary to the water quality targets in the TMDL, whether or not the upstream boundary is at a state line. This concept is also applied when upstream states issue National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or NPDES, permits. As Ohio EPA intends to include the entire watershed in the mass balance calculations, it would appear relatively simple to include the upstream reductions required for Indiana and Michigan. And then there's a second part to that question. And the second part is, however, it appears that Ohio EPA does not plan to do so. Why not?
We do plan to do so. We haven't shown any of the allocations yet, right? That's our next stage of the TMDL. We will put, basically you described it well, we'll put Indiana and Michigan's loads at a boundary condition that represents just a chop, a 40% reduction.
Okay, the next one is from John Patowski. Why has the Ohio EPA decided not to include flow-weighted mean concentrations of TP and DRP in the loading analysis?
Yeah, it's a good question, like why isn't it there? And it could have been there, and maybe when we go final, we will make a mention of that. TMDLs are inherently a load-based document, planning document. We have every intention. I mean, if you read the Annex 4 recommendation document closely, the flow-weighted mean concentrations are there to be used as guidance, as another way of looking at if we're getting closer, just another way of analysis. And we still fully intend to be looking at the flow-weighted mean concentrations. So it's not in the TMDL officially because it can't. A concentration target isn't in TMDLs. But it will be, it's still certainly part of Ohio's plan overall.
Okay. A 40% phosphorus reduction applied equitably to each HUC 12 would not seem to adequately account for the wide variations in actual phosphorus loads across the subwatersheds, even taking into consideration HWF and land use.
Sometimes I'm not fast with acronyms. HWF, hydrologic weighting factor, yeah, and land use, right, which is what we propose to do. We're really not at a point where we're going to be talking about that much more than, we propose to do that. They won't be equal. You hit the nail on the head here. Currently we're looking at hydrologic weighting factors and land use variations, but I'll just say in the genesis of us coming up with this method, what we were seeing out of the SWOT modeling, really, it was the hydrology and the land use that really dictated changes. If you look at the Scavia work, when the kind of the first multi-model publication that came out of Scavia and in the Michigan Water Science Center, multiple model on the Maumee, and we've talked about this with the whole genesis of the domestic action plan from back to the collaboration. That's what we were seeing out of these SWOT models was hydrology and land use really drove it. So we intend to make that case in the preliminary modeling report. We're working with SWOT modelers to make sure that we have verification and buy-in in that. And we'll be presenting quite a bit more about that in our next report.
Okay, thanks, Paul. We have a comment from Peter Hess. Thank you for putting on the workshop and the efforts you have done. So you're welcome. Thank you for stating that, Peter. Tiffany, is there anything else that you would like to add?
I'm just looking, there are some questions we haven't answered, but it just may be that we don't have an answer today. So if anyone has submitted questions that we haven't flagged to discuss today, please put them in the formal record so we can go back and get the right experts in-house to be able to respond to your questions formally. I will say that as part of this document, we will be doing a formal response to comments on each question and or comment that comes in the door for this report prior to finalizing the document. And Christy Myers asking me about stakeholder outreach and what more that we plan to do. I don't have details for you yet, Christy. I need to meet with all of the other agency directors and staff and develop a plan. Our goal was to get this document completed and do this outreach event and hopefully then switch gears and start planning our formal outreach for the preliminary modeling results. I'm hoping I will be able to detail a plan for all of the stakeholders by early November. And we'll be hopefully very clear on all of the opportunities that will avail all the interest groups between then and March before we finalize the next document, which is what really you guys are interested in, and that's clear on the questions that are coming in. And I apologize that we are not to a point to jump to the PMR report at this time. We've got to get this third step done and under our belt, and then start working with all of you to get a document that we all are on board with.
Okay, I believe that answered the question, the questions from Todd Brennan. I'll go over them really quickly. Please let me know if you believe that they did. Will the preliminary modeling results report include a preliminary implementation plan within it? And will the final report include a, sorry, just jumped. Will the final report include a final implementation plan at the conclusion of the TMDL?
Hi, this is Melinda. Yes, the part of the preliminary modeling results is a preliminary implementation plan, and the final report will include a final implementation plan. Yes, the TMDL will include one.
We do have a question about a recently announced consent decree, and I'm not at liberty to discuss any of the parameters within that agreement. I suspect it will be lodged with the court within the next couple of months, but until that happens and until there are formal signatures, I can't speak to what's in that consent decree. And again, a lot of questions, more questions about dissolved reactive phosphorus that we will give a lot more robust detail when we get to the preliminary modeling results and what we are doing for DRP at this time and why we're not doing more. Heather, I think that covers.
I was just going to say, if there are any other questions that don't have to do with DRP, then we can take them. Otherwise, I can give the address again. Remember that all comments are due no later than October 22nd, 2021. They should be submitted to EPA TMDL at epa.ohio.gov. And again, please include anything that you reference, maps, photos, other documents in your comments as an attachment. So thank you very much.
And Heather, you did say that the presentation is in the handouts for the webinar. Do they know how to get a hold of that?
If you click on the view handouts, if you look at your screen, it says questions. there is a View Handouts button. You can click on that and you can download those or print them out. If you have any questions, let me give you my email address. You can email me and I can make sure that you get copies of the handouts if this does not work for you. My email address is heather.lauer@epa.ohio.gov. Thank you all very much for attending this meeting today and participating in our process.